Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Thursday. Hey, Deb, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm looking out the window here. It is sunny in New York and warm out, at least for the spring, and I'm happy.
Yeah, it feels like that here in Ohio, too. And welcome, everyone, to Get Paid, the profitable advantage of inclusive diversity. So happy to have you here today and to talk about what we're going to talk about today, right? So every week we come to you with a different subject and we give you nuggets.
Yeah.
Things to consider, things to talk about. And we're so excited because every week we come, we get more and more people who are engaging with us. So please continue to share your thoughts and communicate with each other. So today we're talking about valuing different work styles in corporate culture, right? And so, we all have worked at some job where we've either been interviewed. Of course, we didn't have the job if we weren't interviewed, or we've been on the other side of interviewing. And we've all heard or had to deal with this idea of corporate culture and does the candidate fit in? Or once they're there, what happens if the corporate culture is contrary to that person's work style? Doesn't mean that they wouldn't be successful necessarily in the culture as a whole, but there's something about their work style and their personal authenticity that is a little different, or could be a big difference in the corporate culture. How do you handle that difference, and how do you value it? So, Deb, I'm going to lob it to you right now for you to take it from here. We have a
Yeah.
lot to talk about in this area.
Yeah, we do. And, I know we had talked earlier when we were kind of prepping for today, and I know that you've had this happen to you, and I've had it happen to me as well. Like my personal style, like I am quieter. I'm somebody who is more of a listener first. I like to listen to what people are saying. I like to take it in, think about it, and then I speak when I think there's something to be said. I'm not somebody who just speaks to speak. And I have been in situations and in cultures where that has not been as appreciated or valued as somebody who just talks to talk, or somebody who wants to take all of the air out of the room. And it can be hard because they talk about executive presence, or they talk about gravitas, or whatever the word of the day is. And sometimes what people don't realize is that you can have gravitas or executive presence even if you're quiet, even if you're thoughtful and speak when you think it's important to speak. That doesn't mean you don't have presence. And it's hard when corporations only value a certain style and only literally promote, or figuratively promote people with those styles. So I think it's up to the leadership first and foremost. If you have a team, hopefully, of diverse people in all ways, including style, you should make sure that you are valuing them, understand their style, and allow them to speak. That's very, very important.
Well, and I think those are great guidelines. And as an HR professional, I think that's where, if you're in a situation where you're in those meetings, you could be helpful as well. You're an HR professional, so you see it from that perspective. I have had it as well, and I've had several situations where I've been in this, it's almost like a quandary, because as a woman of color, I walk in the room and there are preconceived, biases and notions about who I am before I open my mouth. And I remember when I started my career in Macy's executive training program, and I had gotten a little far along. I was a group manager in stores, and I had been around people who felt like the only way to be heard was to be loud or to be mean, or their moods shifted with business, and none of that really was my authenticity, right? Like I can't be effective in trying to figure out how to shift business to respond to business if I'm all worked up in a tizzy. And I also know that I'm not going to be heard if I'm just the one who's the screaming Mimi. And I remember the COO of the store said to me one day, and I had never heard this before. He's like, Kimberly, if you continue to just show up as your authentic self, you are going to be so effective, because as a leader, you walk softly, but you carry a big stick. And I just didn't know what that meant. And I said, well, what does that mean? He's like, you don't have to be loud when you walk in a room, because when you walk in, the way you carry yourself, and when you speak, to your earlier point, Deb, people know that the reason you're speaking is because there's something to be said. Now, I carried that with me, and I felt like, okay, I know this is who I am, and I feel comfortable in this space, but it hasn't always served me. You know, I worked in another environment where I was the only woman in this leadership position, and I was the only person of color in these meetings. And so I'm in a room full of white men. And it was almost at times where they just didn't even, you know, I would say something, and then they would just talk over, loud, scream, curse, you know, and I was like, oh man, how am I going to be successful in this space? Because unless I stand up and start cursing them out like sailors, which I know how to do, but I don't want to do it in this environment.
Right.
How am I going to be effective? And so that's when you start to learn, here are the things that I need to do to hold on to my authenticity, but to be effective, right?
Yeah. And I can understand that too. And I'm not a person of color, but as a woman, there are some biases as well, because if you happen to have an aggressive style and use it, you can, you know, sometimes be called the B word. And, you know, there's different expectations around how women should behave versus how men should behave. Or if you happen to be a woman, either white or woman of color, who has a more quieter style, like we were talking about, there absolutely can be assumptions and biases made about your effectiveness and ability. And I think, you know, if you get yourself in a situation, you know, if you're interviewing with a company, you know, sometimes it's hard to know. You know, you can try your best to get to know people and ask a lot of questions and go through the interview process. But sometimes you get into a situation where you've joined an organization, and the culture that's, you know, kind of approved, that you see people getting rewarded for, is the style might be different than what yours is. So in those cases, you're just going to have to like read the room and figure out the best way for you to kind of get your point across in a way that's authentic to you, but still gets people to listen. And it can be challenging. And I think it can somewhat be anxiety provoking at times, because you're trying to kind of work against type, but sometimes you have to do that.
Well, and I agree with that. But there are two things that I think about that. One, the environment that thinks there's only one way of doing is really totally not innovative, and you wonder how are they as a company, and how are they moving forward, right? Because if you think there's only one way to get things done, and that is to be whatever everybody else is, then you're losing opportunity, right? And having different points of view and different working styles will definitely, it's like economic development for the business, right? When you invest in people who bring these different styles and perspectives. Now, having said that, I know that if I showed up, and oftentimes, here's the thing, the majority who are there have this privilege that they don't even know they have this privilege. Because I can tell you, there are many times where I've been in situations where I just wanted to start flipping, like really coming at people because they were coming at me, right? But I had to be more on the higher level and not back down, because that's not who I authentically, you're not going to walk all over me, but I'm also not going to be the clown in the middle of the floor showing my ass to get my point across, right? Because it's not a privilege, it's not enjoyable, and I'm not going to be that person. And so I've learned to bring Kimberly fully in there, and I learned a great lesson from my grandmother. And, you know, God bless her, she would be 108 years old on March 25th. But here's the lesson I learned from her. And I was thinking about it. We didn't talk about it, but I just want to share this. This is from Julia Sanders. I remember when I was in second grade, and my grandmother lived in a row home, and she had beautiful roses in her backyard. and she had put up a fence between her and her neighbor. And there used to be space about this big where her roses were on this side, then there was some space, and then there was her fence. And over time, her neighbor had pushed her fence so far that in certain areas, my grandmother's roses were on the other side of the fence. And so she's like, wait, what is going on? Every time I go up here, what is going on? And so one day she's out in the backyard and I could see her talking to the neighbor, right? But I couldn't hear her. Like, she wasn't yelling and screaming and making a big deal, but she was talking to her and she was following her up the fence and down the fence. And at one point the neighbor was like, oh, and started crying, right? And ran in the house. And I was like, well, why is she acting like that? I haven't seen my grandmother like come out of character at all. And what my grandmother, who was college, she had gone to college, back in, I don't know, the late 20s for a short amount of time, but she was educated. And she was like, I said, what was that? And she was like, you don't have to come out of your character, but just have a very good vocabulary and make sure that you are clear in what you say and you stay on point. And now she knows that I am going to have an inspector come out here and we are going to figure out where my land starts and where hers ends. And I'm getting my fence back. Right? And I was just like, okay, got it. And so, yay, right? You don't have to show out to show out, right? People can hear you if you are true to yourself and you can stay on point.
Yes.
So that I just want to share that because I
love it.
Yeah. And so, that just goes back to the young lady recently asked me how I need to show up in a meeting. I am not a loud person. And I feel like people talk over me or they'll say my point and then I don't know what to say. And so, I thought back to my grandmother and I said, well, here's what I've always done. I believe in the power of three, but you can make it whatever you want it to be. Make sure that you are very clear in what you want to get across. So I said, make sure you know what are the three most important things about your business, what are the three key steps that got you there, and what do you want the outcome to be? And make sure you know that with every conversation you walk into. So that was my suggestion. So Deb, what's your bottom line?
So my bottom line on this is some of the things that we talked about today. First of all, is to know yourself. You want to show up authentically. You got to read the room and figure out, okay, how do I get my points across and still be me? And, sometimes it's a little easier because some organizations will value everybody's perspective, and sometimes it's going to be a little more challenging. But either way, be true to yourself. The second is similar to the advice you gave the person who was asking you about her three things, having those three things. That just says to be prepared. When you come into a meeting or you show up and have something to say, know your facts, be prepared. You don't have to scream them. You can just say them. And then people will listen, hopefully. And then finally, support others, because there's always going to come a time where you might feel very comfortable in the way in which you communicate, but you see that somebody else is struggling or not getting their point across. And if you can reach across and help them and support them and promote them to be able to speak, then when you hopefully have your own challenges or need support, they're going to be there for you too. And I always believe that creating that kind of network is critical for everything that we do, especially at work.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your bottom line. So now, what's next week? What's next week? So here's what's next week. We know that we are in some stage of COVID. Some people say we're coming out of it. People are interviewed. There's just a lot going on around COVID, and it's really affecting us. It's affecting women. So next week, we're going to talk about, the top challenges that women have in interviewing and trying to re-enter the workforce. Right? Or find the right space, because things have changed so much. Maybe what was working before COVID just isn't working now. So join us next week and we're going to talk about that. COVID is affecting women exponentially. What are the challenges that we're having and how can we overcome them? And then where are we going to be next?
We're going out to Clubhouse. We have a room set up if you want to join us just to continue this conversation about styles or anything else you might want to talk about. We'll be there for a few minutes. So if you want to join us, please feel free. And thanks for listening.
Thank you. And I just want to say, Banjara, I will post the power. I have people who are asking for the power of three. I will post the power of three. I can't do it in studio, but I will post it. So thank you for asking for that. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. And we'll see you in Clubhouse?
Yes.
Or next week.
Or next week, yes.
Bye, guys.
Bye.